Financial relationships don't look like they used to look like, right? The whole PFI thing, the primary financial institution thing, doesn't even exist anymore. I might use Venmo for what I need it for, which is and might still use the credit union, but that's gonna take deposits and services and stuff away from the credit union.
The Digital Banking Podcast is powered by Tyfone. Tyfone is the creator of Infinia, a dramatically better digital banking platform for community financial institutions, as well as several platform-agnostic, revenue-generating point solutions. Our highly configurable platform and broad ecosystem of third-party partners ensure our entire suite is scalable and extensible to meet the needs of any FI. On our podcast, you will hear host Josh DeTar discuss today's most pressing financial technology topics with seasoned industry experts from every possible discipline.
Your podcast hasn't officially made it until there's ads in it. But this is one you're not going to want to skip past. And, well, if you do, feel free to hit that fast forward 15 seconds button twice. Ever wonder what gives me my energy and enthusiasm during these podcasts? Outside of my relentless desire to learn about, connect, share, and build up community FIs and their mission to support the communities they serve. It's coffee, and lots of it. Now, you want to know what's better than your regular old coffee? How about donating $5 to the Children's Miracle Network hospitals through Credit Unions for Kids every time you purchase high-quality, ethically sourced coffee that also provides living wages to coffee farmers. So if you want to listen to this episode with epic levels of caffeine-induced focus and help kids in need, head to javaforkids.org to learn more and buy a bag or 10. Thanks.
Welcome to another episode of the Digital Banking Podcast. My guest today is Derrick Aguilar, the Chief Experience Officer at PenAir Credit Union. Broad shoulders and strong legs. That's the first thing that comes to mind for me when I think of Derrick. Not because he's built like Arnold Schwarzenegger, although he may be. I can't really tell from his suit. No, I say that because of what Derrick stands for and what's truly important to him. As the CXO of a credit union and someone who's deeply passionate about giving people opportunities and beautiful life experiences, he carries a lot of weight around on those shoulders. And he tries to spend as much time as he can walking as many miles as he can in other people's shoes. Derrick says he had a great life as a child, but growing up being raised by a single mom meant he didn't have the luxury to travel and experience different cultures, people, or foods. So as he got older and started going to college for an international business degree, the desire to do just that was invigorated. Now, it's a core part of he and his wife's mission for how they want to raise their two children. Show them a life of love and comfort, but with just the right dose of adversity to help them grow and world experiences to make them well-rounded. So how does this parlay into his professional day-to-day? Well, Derrick says, obviously everything in life is an experience. While a bad experience, shopping at the grocery store, can easily be shaken off in a day or two, a bad experience with our finances can cut way deeper and have a far bigger ripple effect on our lives. At the end of the day, our finances are some of the most important things in life to us, right behind our families and our health. But our financial health and stability actually has a direct impact on those two other things. And as an industry, we have a huge opportunity to do good for people, or the opposite. And Derrick takes that really serious. Thinking back to the very first time he was sitting across from a member as a member services rep and thinking, wow, this person trusts me, has left a forever impact on him. So today, we get to hear from someone who has run with the bulls and lived to tell about it, and how those life experiences shapes how he thinks about member experience at his credit union. Derrick, thanks for joining me, man.
Yeah, excited to be here.
I feel like, our listeners would probably be a little upset with me if I didn't ask for at least a little bit more of the story of the running with the bulls. I don't think you just trickle that out to people and then never come back to it.
Yeah, talk about doing something way outside of your comfort zone. As you mentioned, I love to travel, and my family loves to travel. This was a trip that I was invited on by, from a friend, and I said, yeah, that sounds amazing. That sounds great. And although I was absolutely nervous and scared beforehand. And anyways, I did it. I'm glad I did. And I lived to, to tell the story, which is fantastic. And the only thing is I got to do it again. My son,
Oh, really?
Yeah, my son didn't get to go with me on that trip, and he's still kind of sideways with me about it and told me that when he turns 18 that I got to take him. So we'll see.
So you're going to keep up your running for the next few years.
Yeah. Fortunately, it's only a 1/4 mile run. It's actually not a very long run. It's pretty short, but yeah, maybe I'll tell him it's longer. We'll see if I can convince him otherwise. I don't know.
See, my problem is I'm stubborn enough that I can just run forever, but it ain't fast. And so I always joke, I'm like, yeah, I run forever, but if the bear's chasing you and me, like I'm the one, I'll be the sacrificial lamb. You'll get to survive. Like I ain't going anywhere fast. So I'm always like the run with the bulls is a total bucket list for me. But I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be the guy at the back of the pack that's going to get skewered.
Well, it's funny because my buddy, he's kind of like that too. He's the guy that's just going to run faster than everybody and or at least try to outrun the person next to him. And we were with a group of people, and another one of our friends was with us, and she froze when it started.
Oh, no.
She was terrified, and I had to grab her arm, and I said, "We got to go." And people are falling and, getting stepped on and stuff, and we're jumping over people, and I'm like grabbing her arm so she doesn't fall, and she kind of stays with the group and that sort of thing, because they say the most dangerous thing is when a bull gets separated or when you're by yourself, right? Bull gets separated from the pack. They don't know what's going on, and it kind of makes things kind of scary, and then you're kind of in trouble. So I wanted to kind of stay with the pack and not lead to a stray. So, yeah, that was him. He ran away, and I had to help our friend not get stuck and regret it for the rest of her life or get hurt or something, Like, I didn't actually run. I just stood in place the whole time.
That's wild, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a total bucket list. That's super cool.
You got to do it.
Really? So,
And then the festival itself is awesome, too. It's
I was going to say,
fun.
yeah, so there's got to be a whole element of an experience around it, too, right?
Yep. It's a 7-day festival. And, at night, there's all sorts of, festival type stuff and wine and tapas and activities. And they do a little run for the kids where people dress up with, in these bull kind of outfits and put firecrackers on the horns and running around and stuff. And the kids get to kind of run around or run away from that. So it's fun. It's amazing.
That's super neat. Well, it's funny when we were talking before we hit record, you were like, well, it's going to sound kind of silly. And I was like, then it's probably right. I love that kind of stuff. But you're like, everything in life is an experience. And I think that's so true. But it's interesting, like as you get older and older, and if you had more experiences, it is really fascinating to think about, like, what are the experiences that stand out most in your mind? And how did those shape you? And it is really true. Like some of these, crazy experiences that we've had, you never forget.
No, and the things that stand out in your mind are either the things that give you the most joy or give you the most pain, right? And typically the things that give you the most pain. And whether you're talking about from a personal perspective, like a fun travel memory, like I just shared with you, I'll remember that forever. And, I'll remember travels with my kids forever. I hope they do too, and in a positive manner. Even in scenarios where travel hasn't gone as planned, it still always kind of works out and it's kind of fun. But when you have a negative experience in a manner that really affects you and really cuts deep, typically it's because it's something that's meaningful to you. And those things shape you as well. And I think it also helps you get a better understanding for other people and reminds you that you don't know what people are going through, especially when you're in an industry like ours or you're in a role like mine or in a lot of roles in credit unions, right, where you really have to be cognizant of what other people are going through or at least try to be understanding of that. Having your own experiences from that perspective, I think are really important and allow you to be empathetic and that sort of thing. So, whether it's something, we're talking about finances, right? If you have a really hard time with something in your life, whether it's buying a home or paying a loan or whatever that is, you're probably going to remember that because of the overlap with the rest of your life. So yeah, those things absolutely shape everything. At least for me, they shape how I think, and they shape how I think about others as well.
I really love the way you kind of tie that all together too, because it's so true. I mean, it's really the biggest experiences, positive and negative, that you remember. And then the impact that it had on your life is kind of how long that stays with you, right? And so the biggest, most impactful things obviously stay with us the longest. And it's like, how can we influence the positive versus the negative? Because those are going to live with people. And the positions that we take in our professional career, like, can literally put you right smack dab in the middle of someone else's life experience and like what that's going to do to them. And it was funny, as you were talking about it, I was thinking about, right before the holidays, I took my last work trip, and this was right before the holidays. And I'm one of those people, I like go all year. I probably should be better about this. I, like, never take time off, but I try to shut it down hard at Christmas. And like, my wife and kids always look forward to that. I try to really unplug, be super home, be super present. And I had to take this work trip where I was flying home right at the start of that time off with them. And long story short, it was like one of 3 trips I probably took all year where I actually checked the bag because I had to take a bunch of stuff with me. And so I literally had this empty suitcase that no longer had the stuff in it with me as a checked bag. I go check in the night of my flight. We get on the plane. It gets canceled. We have to get off the plane. I'm like, okay, now I'm in stress mode. I'm trying to figure out how am I going to get home for the holidays. It's the holidays. So it's airports and flights at the holidays, right? Like, the risk you run. I'm a seasoned travel pro. Like, I get this. So I'm not terribly bent out of shape because this is just life. This is kind of the risk you take, right? But at the same time, I'm stressing because I'm like, I got to get home to my kids. This is a non-negotiable. So I'm on the phone with Alaska, and, obviously the customer service agent, they didn't go break my airplane, right? It's not their fault.
It's not their fault.
Right? But they're now in the critical path. And it was really awesome. Like, the woman that got on the phone with me right away, she's like, all right, I'm getting you home. She's like, I don't know how, but I'm going to get you home. And, she ended up flying me home on JetBlue, right? And so totally different airline. And just that experience was, she was in the critical path of that. And it was because she kind of chose that role. Well, what's interesting, Derrick, is that trip kind of snowballed, because then I was on the first flight out the next morning, supposed to go home. I'm going to have a stop now because I'm on a different airline that doesn't have a direct home to the West Coast. And I have this checked bag. So I was like, hey, dude, it's the holidays. This stuff. Get to the airport early. I stayed in an airport hotel. I walk over. I'm walking through the terminals. It is a ghost town, Derrick. There's nobody. I'm like, great. I'm going to be super early. I'm 2 hours early, which I never do for a flight. Like, I'm the guy that cuts it close every time. But like, this one, I'm going to get there early. I'm not even kidding, dude. I walk around to the terminal where JetBlue is. It is shoulder to shoulder, no movement. I'm going to miss this flight. And I'm literally thinking that, like, I can't even get in line to check the bag. I was like, I'm just going to leave the suitcase. I'll buy another one. I'm going to leave the suitcase. I'm just going to go.
Nothing in it. Not worth it, right?
Not worth it. I was like, and again, long story short, I get on the phone with Alaska, and the agent is like, I got you. And so, I tell you that story just because, while that was even a couple of weeks ago now, like, that really stood out. That stood out as 2 people who had total opportunities to influence my experience in that moment. And because they chose a path of, I don't know what their life experiences were like. I don't know what their training was like. I don't know their own personal, like, foundation. But whatever the combination of those things were, they had empathy in that moment. And they were calm, and they were slow, and they were thoughtful, and they were deliberate, and they understood the position that I was in. And it absolutely made a difference, right? And that's something that's, I would argue, like, middle of the road, right? Like, yes, it would have really, really sucked for me to have not gotten home to the family for a couple more days, right? Or whatever. But it wouldn't have been the end of the world, right? We would have all gotten over it. But to your point, like, if I missed 4, 5, 6 of my mortgage payments, that's a really big deal, right? And so you guys do end up being in a really critical path for people's experiences. And so how do you think about, the little experiences, like just how easy is it to, transfer money from checking to savings and digital to, hey, what is an experience like if somebody's in a really tough spot and they walk into our credit union and they need help? Like, how does all of this life that you've experienced and your time at the credit union shape how you approach the CXO role there?
Yeah, and so we talked a little bit about how the big life events, right, have an impact on you and stay with you for time, whether it's positive or negative. But sometimes those little things feel really big too. And even in the grand scheme of things, like in your travels, right? In the grand scheme of things, it's not the end of the world. Nobody's dying. It's not to be dramatic, but you might miss a day or two with your family, but you'll remember that. Your kids will remember that. And then you'll remember the whole experience through the feeling. We keep using the word experience, but really it's the feeling that you have and the stress and the consternation and that sort of thing. So it doesn't matter, whether you're trying to move money around or, you're at risk of not being able to make your mortgage payment because of whatever, government shutdown just because that's recent or, whatever it might be. It's really up to us to really not so much focus on, the type of issues from that perspective. It's up to us to try to better understand, where our members are and what they need and really step up to the plate for that moment of truth, whether it's an in-person interaction like the ones that you had, just what you're sharing, these two individuals, maybe it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't that big a thing in the grand scheme of things, but you remember it. And then you're talking about it. And the fact that they gave you that affirmation up front, like, hey, I got you. That automatically helped you. Like, okay, let me calm down.
Okay.
Right. They're going to help me. This is great. But also with how we focus on, setting up the credit union and its infrastructure and all of the things you mentioned, digital banking, and all of those things are table stakes at the end of the day. Right. We have to be able to do those things right. And we may screw something up. Is something doesn't work, something simple, you reference like a money transfer or something like that. That may seem simple, just having a conversation sort of flippantly, but it's not. We don't know what that person needs to move that money for. We don't know what else they have going on in their life. So we treat, and we come from the perspective that every moment counts and every moment at the very least has the potential to be a big deal for that individual. And we take that seriously. And our we're a purpose-driven organization, and our purpose is simple and it's not novel. We're probably not. I know for a fact we're not the only credit union that has a purpose or a mission. It's simple. It's enhancing lives, right? And it's in all of our conference rooms. It's all in our break rooms. It's in all our meeting rooms as a reminder that every moment matters, and it doesn't matter whether we think it's small or large. It has the potential to be a big impact to that member, no matter what.
Derrick, I was fortunate enough. Gosh, this was maybe 18 months ago or so. I had a guest on the podcast who was the former CIO for JP Morgan Chase. And he gave an example. And what I thought was really interesting was, this was coming from somebody who worked for, let's just be honest, who a lot of times we call, the bad guys, the big banks in the industries.
Right.
And I think it's because a lot of times what happens at scale is the personalization of care and services and connection to community gets lost. And you become more of a check mark the box than a really value-driven relationship with people. But what I thought was really interesting was he was talking about how, a lot of times we think, especially in the world of software, especially in the world of like services in terms of percentages. Right. And he gave an example of, he said he was in a meeting one day and one of his operations teams came in to give him and Jamie Dimon like the whole rundown of the organization and blah, 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 blah. And they came in and they touted how impressively low their downtime statistic was on their ATMs. And it was like some fraction of a percent. Right. And so they had that meeting. They came back to the next meeting and he started the meeting with, he goes, you guys remember telling me how impressive that stat was and how proud of it you were? They're like, yeah. He goes, cool. I ran the math. This is how many like tens of thousands of people were affected. And he was like, so I would like for you to go to every single one of their houses and tell them how proud you are of that statistic. I was like, oh, savage. But, it was interesting. It sparked a conversation, and it turned into something that we actually talk a lot about, which is kind of what you were talking about, right? Like, you think about the impact that it has at maybe a global level may not seem like a big deal.
Right.
But I use the example of, like, for us or for digital banking, right? RDC, remote deposit capture, it's an integration, right? There's multiple parties involved in this. It goes down for whatever reason, right? For one person. Statistically, that is no big deal. Statistically, that is really, really, really good. Probably nobody's SLAs have even impacted at that point, right? One single person. Who cares? That one person who couldn't use RDC is a single mom who works at a restaurant that pays her with a check, and she needs to be able to cash that check to be able to pay her rent today. And RDC is down for her. And so now she has to drive to the nearest branch that'll accept that check before they close. And
If they're even open.
Yep. And to do that, she has to miss her son's baseball game. And the point is, I want you to go sit in front of that mom and tell her how proud you were. There was only one person that was affected. You know what I mean? And that is, I think that's where, especially the credit union industry, is really, really special. It's because there's people like you that I'm putting words in your mouth, but I feel pretty confident in this. You would really care about that one person, right? Like, you would lose sleep over that one person.
100%. We have to be careful to not get caught in that trap that you're talking about, right? The percentages and the statistics, and those things are important. Certainly have to leverage that information to make decisions and that sort of thing. But I think that people that are in a role like mine also have to have very high expectations and very little wiggle room as it relates to those things, within reason, of course, because the impact, as you mentioned, whether it's to one person or 10,000 people, could be life-changing or life-altering. And even if she's able to get it done, as I alluded to earlier, you in the conversation we had before this, even if you're able to get what you need at the very end, like in your example, you're able to get the check cashed and pay your rent, and it's fine, but you missed your child's baseball game, and you're all stressed out, and you were almost going to be in a really bad situation. That feeling is going to stick with that person, and that feeling's not going to be good. And it's not only going to hurt us as her financial institution, whoever her financial institution is, but it's going to hurt her in the long run, and she's going to feel scarred and going to have issues with trust and being able to leverage those tools that should be helping her, not making her life more difficult.
Yeah. You were talking about earlier too. I totally, like, there's so many elements of financial services that are totally table stakes, right? And they're just kind of check mark the boxes that we have to offer. They're not differentiating. They're not special.
Yeah.
But we have to do it. But what I'd love to get your perspective on is, I would argue that how you do the table stakes and how you kind of tie them all together is actually what makes you a little bit special and unique. So how do you guys think about all of the different channels that you now have to manage as a CXO of every single interaction point a member could have with your credit union and could have an experience? I mean, I'm sure if you can't chart that out, it's almost terrifying how many different ways they can have an experience with you. So how do you think about tying all those together and trying to manage as many of those interaction points being as positive as possible?
Yeah. So the first thing is, tactically, we try not to focus on features, because it's really easy to do that. That's a check the box thing, right? So we go to a conference, or we read up on the trades or whatever, the next best thing. And then all of a sudden you're doing this because it's the next new shiny thing, this technology or this vendor that maybe does it better, or partner that maybe does it better, or whatever. So I try to make sure that our teams don't get too caught up in that, because then you're just doing things here, and then they're not interconnected, or they're not talking to each other, or maybe they're not even really relevant. And I've been at PenAir for almost 4 years now, about 3.5 years, and I saw a little bit of this, and not because PenAir was doing anything wrong, but I think that that's just a symptom, because we have so much going on and coming at us, right? Where we were delivering services through digital channels that members didn't even really want or care about, right? Like you spend all this time and effort launching it, and then nobody's using it,
Yeah.
and maybe maybe it was too soon in the process or whatever. But at the end of the day, somebody got sold on something that we really didn't do our due diligence on from a member need perspective, which I think everything has to start with. What are the actual needs? And I'll tell you what it is. It's e-notary service. And not that there's anything wrong with that service, but for us, because of a lot of different things that we don't have time to talk about here today, it wasn't the right deployment of resources. And more importantly, it was an opportunity cost where we could have done something else that was more impactful for the member, right? So that was a good learning point for me when I got here. But as I think about the whole thing, and at the risk of using a cliche, or a buzzword, the way that we like to think about this, the way that I like to think about it is an ecosystem, right? So I know it's kind of corny, overused term, but I mean, I don't know any other way to articulate it. Yeah. It's an ecosystem, and the member doesn't care. They don't care that you have, digital banking, that you have person to person, that you have ACH, that you have real-time payments. They don't care about any of that you have branches, that you have the contact center. What they care about is, can I do what I need to do when I need to do it? Is it easy? And is it going to help me or is it going to hurt me? All of those things, depending on the stakes, depending on the scenario. That's what the member cares about. So I need to move money and I can't go to a branch today. So the member's not thinking about channels. They're just thinking about how they're going to move that money, right? So we try to look at it from that same perspective on our side. Yes, I understand there's different channels, there's different infrastructure, but at the end of the day, it's up to us to bring it together. And we're not perfect, and we're not, we're definitely not where we want to be, but we're working towards that, and that's really creating an experience for our members that when they think about PenAir and they need to do something, they have an option for that, and an option that works for them at the right time. And that's really easy to say. It's really easy for me to articulate that and say that that's what but it's really hard to execute, right? So that's the way I have it written in my portion of the strategic plan, right? In terms of, from a member experience perspective, that's what our teams see. And we have it split it up into different things. So you got the ecosystem, which is really the way the member interacts with us. And then we have those different categories, like we talked about, whether it's just simple digital banking or it's money movement, or whatever. But the goal there, by having it structured that way, is by bringing it together and figuring out how we can overlap, so that way the member can interact the way they want to. And if they need to jump channels, they can do that as well. But again, super hard to execute, something that we're constantly working on improving and getting better at.
That brings up another interesting point, Derrick. I was thinking about, kind of tying back to what we're talking about of, using the example of somebody not being able to use RDC. To your point, like, members have no idea. They see the tip of the iceberg. They have no idea what's going on underneath of that. And one of the things that I find kind of fascinating.
And they don't care either.
No, and they don't care.
They just want their check to go into their account. That's it. Yeah. That's all that matters.
So this is one of those experiences that'll stay with me forever that had a really big impact on me. I won't name names, but I was with one of our customers, and I was literally just in town and was like, hey, I want to stop by, say hi, see how things are going, talk about what's happening. And I was there, and they ended up having some critical system failures of different things. And I was like, hey, I'm happy to just leave and let you guys deal with this. I was like, but do you mind if I just sit as a fly on the wall in the war room? I'd love to take this as a learning to see how you guys interact with something like this and, what happens. And so I'm just kind of sitting there and observing, and this went in late into the night. And I mean, people haven't gone home, seen their families. I was like, you guys want me to order pizza for you? You just realize none of you have eaten? And what was crazy was I got home, and I don't know what made me think of it, but later on, I happened to be checking their Google reviews, and there were a bunch of comments from that day when they had this system outage, and people were absolutely livid. And I remember seeing one comment that said, whoever is in charge of this piece of the credit union should be fired. And it really hit me, man, because I know who that person was. They were in the war room. And I know how freaking dedicated they were and how much they cared and how much sleep they lost and how they didn't go home to their family. And they could have said, hey, you know what? We'll get to this tomorrow. They don't. They don't say that.
No.
They jump right into the trenches and they get to work. And why I bring that up is it's just, like people don't know, they don't care. But to them, now there's a negative experience for them. And yes, you think about the trickle down effect of, okay, maybe that was somebody who missed their rent payment and now that snowballed a whole other set of problems for them or whatever it may have been. But, to them, they were like, this is something simple. Whoever let this fail should be fired. It's like, no, you actually don't understand like the layers of complexity of this. And like, you should get in and monkey with a core sometime. You let me know how that works out for you. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so they don't. They're like, I just needed to move money from point A to point B. What's wrong with you idiots? Why couldn't I do this? But nobody really understands the complexity of financial services in the US unless you work in it.
Right. And honestly, they probably shouldn't and shouldn't need to. And it's up to us to work through that. And things are going to happen like that, at the end of the day, because nothing is perfect and nothing will ever be perfect. So it just goes back to how you handle those things and how you create connection, and even in the most difficult moments. And in fact, how you react to the most difficult moments and the most challenging moments really shapes who you are, whether you're talking about as an individual or as an organization. And you will always have, that if you handle things correctly, you will always have a handful of naysayers or vocal minority that is still upset. But at the end of the day, if you handle it right and people see that and you communicate effectively around it, and when I say effectively, also, you try to connect with your members and try to exhibit empathy in your communication, and it's not just this corporate blah, blah, blah. You do those things, then the majority of your membership will see it and they'll feel it. But that's also not just a one-time thing. You develop that connection. You were talking about, at scale, how you handle all of these different touch points. That's another component is we know how to make connection. It's easy to make connection one way or another, good or bad, with people through channels where the member interacts with a person, right? Yeah. At the end of the day. And it's like in your examples with the airline, it's largely up to that individual in terms of what that experience looks like. So as an organization, we have to make sure that we provide right training, hire the right people, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, creating connection with people and creating connection with communities and doing those things on an ongoing basis is so important, because you have to buy that goodwill. I say buy, but really you have to earn is probably a better term. Earn that goodwill over time, because if not, then you're just going back to the corporate blah, blah, blah. If one of the big super regionals or one of the big banks or even the largest, credit unions on the planet have an issue, and if something comes off overly corporate and not really hitting, what members should understand and should hear, and they're not experiencing it in the way that they should, that's going to create some issues for them down the road, from that perspective. So the connection is another hard part, again, at scale, from an organization to a membership, not the one-on-one. I have a great relationship, with Josh, because he's my banker and he takes care of me and he cares about me.
Pardon the pun, but you're right. You're building up a bank with your members. Right.
100%.
And I'm sure we've all, heard the analogy, use the same with your spouse, right? Like, I've set a precedence for my wife that if I say I'm going to be home from a trip, like I will be home and I will make that flight at whatever cost. So when I don't, she knows, I know he tried. I know he cared. Right. But if out of the last 30, I missed 30, she's like, you don't care.
Right. Yeah.
You haven't built a bank of my trust of saying that this is important to you, right? And same thing, like if my credit union just constantly is having issues, constantly is demonstrating that they're not listening, that they don't care, that they're not there, that they're not building a relationship, then of course I'm going to have very little patience. But at the same time, I think, sometimes we're better at it than others, but for the most part, I'd like to think that humans are decent at remembering that none of us are perfect. Right. And so we understand, hey, I get it. This was one of those times that you were imperfect. but you have a track record of working really hard to be as perfect as you can be. And then I think you touched on probably the most important point of it is communicating, right? And it is really interesting to me to see how, not just within our own industry, right, but just industries at large and the companies that you interact with, how some companies handle communication than others, right? Like, I'm a huge fan personally of the radical transparency, right? I love it when I get an email from some company and they're like, hey man, we really screwed up and we're super, super sorry. And here's what happened. Here's what we learned from it. Here's how we're going to fix it. Thank you for keeping your trust in us. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. You bought my business again with that.
Unless it's happening every other week, like
Yeah, totally.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh,
unless you get the I'm sorry over and over and over again. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I mean, communications is such an important part of what we do. I mean, every function of the organization has, is very important in its own right. But speaking of communications, oh my gosh, we labor over how we communicate for different scenarios, for different things. And sometimes I feel like, I feel I have to ask my team, like, okay, I'm sorry that I'm kind of digging my heels in on this, or I'm being so nitpicky, and just because it's so important that we get it right. And sometimes, the wrong tone or the wrong word in the wrong place or something like that, right, can have consequences, and that affects that's part of the experience too. So communications, from a credit union perspective, I think is a really important discipline, because it sort of is the personality of the credit union. And as long as it's aligned with how the credit union actually, executes, right? It's like you talk the talk, you got to also walk the walk. It's so important, because you can walk the walk, but if you don't talk the talk, if you don't communicate effectively, people, at the end of the day, perception is reality. And you may be the best at several things and have the best uptimes and all of that, but if members don't think that because of one incident and you didn't communicate it effectively, or you're just not doing a good job of building goodwill over time and building that kind of relationship with your membership base, then you can, people will think the wrong thing about you. And we have a fantastic communications, function at PenAir that is really involved in a lot of the things that we do. So, we talked about the ecosystem, and you talked about how we look at member experiences and things like that. And communications is literally in the room. They're in the room right now too. They're literally in the room as we are undertaking projects, solving problems, working through initiatives, adding new products, updating technology, because then they help communicate it both internally, so our people know how to communicate it, but also we're communicating it as an organization in an effective manner in the way that it's supposed to be consumed and intended and all of that good stuff.
You touched on something I want to come back to, which is communicating the positive stories to kind of build that bank. But before I do, so that kind of ties into what we were just talking about earlier of, all these different channels. So it's all these different experiences that your members have with you, everything from, were the buttons clean on the ATM to, how long was the teller line on a Friday afternoon, to how long did it take me to get, my phone answered when I called the call center, to, was I able to log into digital banking easily, to how did they communicate and market and message to me? All of those channels all tie together. And you're having to think about kind of that ecosystem of all of those different touch points, and not just that they function well, but that each of those feels like PenAir.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That is so key and important to what we do. If you don't, then, we're just a mobile app. We're just a whatever, and it doesn't matter. And, people these days, they're not loyal to brands, and honestly, why should they be? But you also don't want to give them a reason to run off, because either you're cold or you're not effective in your execution and how you help them solve their problems. So all of that ties together, not just the execution, but the communication 100%. And when you're looking at different channels too, and we're looking at how we communicate about those channels and how we inform our members on what's available to them, it's also understanding how our members use us today, and where there's opportunities to improve those member experiences. And you mentioned the branches and the ATMs and the contact center and that sort of thing. And we've sort of shifted our branch model a little bit, over this. I say sort of. We've shifted our branch model the last couple of years, and that's all based on understanding how our members are using us and what they're using us for. And we're definitely not the first ones that have done this, but we're deploying smaller branches, much smaller, like 1,200 foot smaller, and we're leveraging ITM technology there as well. And the reason that we're doing that is because we're finding that the majority of members are coming in for a couple of different reasons. The first of which, branch is kind of like a help desk, right? So if something either goes wrong or they feel like their situation is complex enough that they need to talk to somebody and have them walk them through it, even if they can do it on their own, they just kind of want a little bit of that extra help, they come to the branch, or they call the contact center. And the contact center is already well equipped for this, but in the branches, we were placing too much of an emphasis on how we service, or placing too much of an emphasis on how we train people and the mental bandwidth that is required around teller transactions and cash operations, right? Mm-hmm. So what we did there is we shrunk our footprint. We leveraged ITMs, which we were already doing in our drive-throughs, so our membership was already, familiar with the technology. And now we have less employees in our branches, yet better trained and more effective at solving problems. Oh, and by the way, if a member doesn't like the ITM, well, they'll have two people help them, because they'll have the person in the branch walk them over and help them, plus the person on the other side in the ITM, right? So it's kind of this concierge white glove service. But the point of all of that is that understanding what our members' needs are and really kind of shifting how we serve them to improve those experiences in those different channels, that allows us to be more effective for them, and really allows us to be more effective in those moments of truth. So if I have a problem and I'm coming in to a branch, whereas in the past, you come in and the person in front of you might also be the vault teller, and they're getting pinged on Teams because they need to do a vault buy, or they need to, they need to give somebody an override on the teller line. They need to excuse themselves, or maybe the line is longer because there's not enough people to cover both sides, and the service really does take a lot longer. We were able to flip that on its head. And for the people that are coming into the branches, we're able to service them with a much higher degree of confidence, and giving them what they need, and up-training and upskilling our people. And then that also allows us to be more effective, going back to the whole ecosystem conversation we had earlier, right? That allows us to be more effective in some of our other channels that don't require human interaction, because now we can place a different kind of focus there. And really tie those two things together, where the branches, and really evolving how we use our branches with how members are interacting with us as we move into the future, because those are obviously getting used less and less, right? And in different ways.
I'd love to get your perspective on this, given what you were just talking about, Derrick. So, one of the things that I've been talking a lot about with folks over the last little bit is we're kind of in a very new age of competition for financial services. I argue it's very, very different than it's been for the last 100 years. And it's because the world has become so incredibly hyper-connected, and I'm not geographically bound anymore.
Right.
And I'm not knowledge deficient the way I used to be, right? And I'll give you a very simple example of that, right? Like, even just think back to the 1990s, right? And if I wanted to learn what all CD rates were available to me, right? That was a lot of work to go figure out who was in my area that could take my cash, that could put it into a CD, that was going to be a good rate, right? Now, and I love showing this as an example, I can go to ChatGPT, and I can build a profile on me and my financial life, and I can say, these are all the products and services that I need. Go find me the right mix of financial institutions, regardless of where they're located, headquartered, couldn't care less, as long as I can do business with them, Go find me the best mix of financial services providers that can provide me the lowest or highest rates, depending on what product I'm looking at, whether it's a loan or like a CD or a money market account. Go find me the best mix and then help walk me through getting relationships with them. And ChatGPT can do that for me. So I would argue rates used to be a great differentiator for credit unions. That's off the table now. And especially when it's a great differentiator for all of you. So if all 10 of the credit unions around you all have great rates, then you just have the same rates.
Yeah.
The other is then the argument is that our big differentiators are people. Well, if everybody says that, it ain't a differentiator either, right? Maybe it's a differentiator against somebody like Venmo, who doesn't have people that pick up phones and care, right?
For those that care. And even then, people, financial relationships don't look like they used to look like, right? The whole PFI thing, the primary financial institution thing, doesn't even exist anymore. I might use Venmo for what I need it for, which is and might still use the credit union, but that's gonna take, deposits and services and stuff away from the credit union.
Yeah. So with that in mind, I would actually then kind of like contradict myself and say that I do actually think that people are your biggest differentiator, but only if used properly. And you have to think about using your people, not just as being really smiling, helpful faces in branches, but how do you create a culture of people at your institution all across the organization, from leaders like yourself to somebody on the teller line? How do you create a culture of thinking about how does this add value or a positive experience to our member? That's where differentiation is going to be created, in my humble opinion. But I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah. So two things. I agree with you. I think that that's going to create some level of differentiation for every financial institution, fintech, whatever, whoever we're talking about, because everybody's doing financial services these days now, right? So the people in the front lines, 100%, right? And I might say, credit union A might say that we have the best people, and credit union B might say they have the best people, and they're probably both going to be pretty good, and they're going to care and all of that good stuff. And then you have the people on the back end that you talked about, the people that the members don't see, but truly care, and at least in our scenario, that truly care. But I'd be willing to bet that most credit unions are kind of fall in that camp. And the intersection of bringing the right talent, but also the talent that believes in the things that we believe in and that has those same type of values. I mean, I know this sounds overly simplistic, but having the right people at the credit union that can help deliver those things, but also care, and then having the right leadership that sets the tone. Just what you said, those are the things that each meeting starts with. Each planning session, each board meeting. I mean, you have to start with that. You have to set the direction and the North Star, and then bring in the right people and with the right talent. Because you can get somebody that's fantastic and is super aligned with the purpose, but maybe they don't have the capabilities that you need, or at least for that role, right? So then you're going to fall short there. So talent development, recruiting, building the culture, yes, 100% agree that is, or can be at least, a differentiator. I also think that another differentiator for, I was going to say for credit unions, but really for anybody, it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier. And it's our ability to connect with the communities that we serve, connect with the members that we serve, and to truly connect. Because at the end of the day, I think you'd agree that we, for lack of a better term, sell a commodity, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Banking services are commodity. Mm-hmm. And I agree with what you said earlier too, right? All the table stakes things, they're table stakes, but you have to be able to execute them right. You can't just have them and then that's it. If you're not executing correctly, then you're creating member experience issues, and people can't pay their bills or get what they need, or get a loan in an expedient manner, or whatever. So that connection that I kind of alluded to earlier is I think really difficult in buying that goodwill. And that's also a part of the culture and part of the people, because you have people that have to do that, right? So it's all interconnected. But by doing that and by setting the tone and having the right culture, that's really where I think you could be the most differentiated, at least from others in your service area or at all, because as you mentioned, the geographic bounds just don't really exist anymore. So for us, there's a couple of different things, but I'll mention one that's really important, and it kind of alludes to all of the culture building and like starting the meetings and all of that kind of stuff. But one of our guiding principles is a term that we coined, basically a word we made up. It's communerosity.
Okay, I like it. Explain it.
And I can't take credit for this. I wish I could, because it's awesome. And it's my understanding, if I have the story correct, that somebody in our cash vault, we have a cash in transit function where we do we're our own Brinks or Loomis or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Which is really cool. So, but somebody in our cash vault many eons ago kind of came up with this term and shared it with marketing, and marketing was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, right? And then we incorporated it into what we do and all that good stuff. So this is amazing and it's fantastic. But communerosity is a combination of community and generosity, right? And it is one of our guiding principles. And it talks to what we're here to do and why we do it and why it's important. And that is the cornerstone of our brand narrative. It is the cornerstone of our communications. When we do marketing, it's not, we do product marketing and everything everybody else does. But we really leverage this guiding principle, not just the words, but in how we interact and the community service that we do, and how we're generous with our time and how we're generous monetarily, but also what that means for how we serve our members. Yeah. And we really leverage that narrative to try to build that connection with our members in the communities that we serve. And it's something that in our core markets, in the markets that we've been in for a while, people resonate with and they know about it. And it really gives us that goodwill that we talked about, and it's goodwill earned. It's not just we're saying words to buy goodwill. It's goodwill earned. But to me, that's a part of the differentiation, because we're more than just a place where you keep your money or that gives you a home loan or what have you. We're a lot more than that, and that's what we try to be, and we try to have a personality and try to connect in more ways than just those transactional ways, like deposit your money with us because we offer this rate.
Yeah, that perfectly brings us back around to what we parked earlier. But I want to kind of finish out on, you had made a comment about, people aren't loyal to a brand. And I would agree. I don't think people are loyal to a brand. But what I do think they are loyal to is they're loyal to a culture.
Yep.
And they're loyal to, I guess I could probably throw out any number of examples of companies, and immediately you would say, oh, they suck to work with, or I really don't like that company, right? I guarantee you there's really amazing human beings that work there that really, really care and are trying really, really hard. But the culture of that organization doesn't support them. It doesn't enable them. It doesn't empower them. And it doesn't build them up and build a culture around them. And so, no, their customer base is not going to be loyal to them, right? Because they can see the culture of the company. It's just not that. But on the flip side, a company's culture from an outside perception is made up by a lot of different things. And it's everything from the interactions that I have with them to, how do they align with my personal views of corporate social responsibility to, just the other week, my wife and I were talking about, there's a company that I love and follow and buy their products. And I bought a handful of their stock when they IPO'd. I've completely lost my shorts on it, like bad. and I just kind of forgotten about looking at the stock because it had gotten so bad.
Yeah.
But I still follow the company. The other day I looked at it and it's far worse than I'd even ever imagined. And I was telling my wife about it and she was like, well, so how do you feel about the company then? And I was like, well, when you look at your Apple stocks, it always pulls up like recent news and everything along with it.
Uh-huh.
You know what the top story was that the company was so proud that they got crucified at their earnings call, but they had raised and donated $400 million to pay off veterans' medical bills. And I was like, yep, I love the company. Don't care.
Yeah, hard not to, right?
That aligns with my corporate social responsibility. So that tells me about the culture of the company. And that was the reason why I loved them in the first place, was what they were doing for veterans. And so they were saying, hey, look, other people may not love the areas of our business, but we're doing what we said we were going to do. And so for me, I was like, that earns my trust. So I'm not loyal to their brand. I'm not loyal to their products. Their product is a total commodity product I can replace tomorrow with any other like 10,000 options. But I'm going to remain loyal to them for all of these different reasons. And I think credit unions are in a really, really similar place to that, right? Like you align so incredibly well with, I think, what a lot of people are really craving these days, which is alignment to doing good and community. And let's take politics out of it. Just look at, people are passionate right now. People are passionate about the things that they care about. And I think, again, you take the politics and the sides out of it. At the end of the day, what most people really, really want is they just really want good for their fellow human. We just want our communities to thrive and be successful and to be happy. And credit unions really represent that in financial services. I've always argued that point. And one of the things, again, brings us back around to what we've parked and you were just kind of talking about. One of the things that absolutely kills me is how little credit unions seem to want to talk about that.
Yeah, we're the world's
And I'm like, man, you guys are literally like,
secret.
yeah, you're Superman and you're running around like Clark Kent all the time. Like throw on the cape every once in a while, show people what's up.
100%, absolutely. And I think that's going back to the things that differentiate us. That's one of those differentiators for us as an industry. And it's also the best kept secret, and we don't do a good enough job of telling that story. And you know, when members think about going back to, you know, them not caring about the plumbing and the infrastructure, they just want to take care of what they got to take care of. They just think of us as their bank, and they even say that I got to go to the bank, you know, or I got to call the bank, or I got to do something on you know, on the app at the bank or whatever. So differentiating ourselves in a better way to where people understand, like the company you're referring to, we don't care, you know. Well, first of all, there's no fat cats in Wall Street getting rich off of credit unions. I mean, at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
Like our stakeholders and our stockholders, if you want to use that term, are our members.
It's you.
Yeah. So everything that we do, and I can say this confidently as an industry, generally speaking, I'm sure there's some exceptions, but generally speaking, everything that we do, I know we do at PenAir, everything that we do, it's for our members, and it's with our members in mind, and it's to give back to our members. And talking about the things that we mention when we start meetings or when we're doing, you know, when we're launching something new or whatever, is not only how does this affect the member, but how does this give him back to the member? So, you know, at the end of the day, we have to make sure that people truly understand that. So while we do a good job of talking about the work we do in the community, I think we generally do that. We don't do a good enough job educating people on the difference. And while a big bank or a private bank is not a bad thing, is different. And, you know, we're going to do things that are going to benefit the member, not the stockholder on Wall Street or what have you.
Dude. Yeah. That's the kind of stuff when people talk like that, like I get super pumped because that's the truth, man. I probably overuse this, you know, in podcast episodes, but you know, one of the things that I love doing that probably annoys everyone else if I put myself in their shoes, but one of the things I love to do when I travel around is, I've gotten to the point like talking about, you know, companies that create good experiences, right, wrong, or indifferent. Like one of the things that's had a huge impact for me is Uber and Lyft. I never rent a car anymore, man. It's actually cheaper and more efficient for me to just Uber or Lyft wherever. Because usually, you know, I fly into the airport nearby the credit union. It's pretty simple meetings. I don't go anywhere. I don't need to do anything. I just get my Uber, go to the hotel. Every time I'm in Uber, I always ask, I'm like, hey, just curious, where do you bank?
They're like, what?
Right? And it always leads into these super fascinating conversations. And it comes back to what you were talking about with like, just sometimes people don't even like realize until you start having the conversation, the impact that it has had. And sometimes they do. And what's fascinating is when you hear the people that I'll talk to and they're willing to share and they're like, oh, I'm with this credit union. I'm with PenAir. I'm like, rad, tell me about that. Like, how long you been a member? Like, what services do you use from them? Why do you like them? And what's really, really cool is how many times people tell me these crazy stories of some one moment. And it wasn't the table stakes thing. It was that one time they really needed somebody to be in their camp, and the credit union was in their camp. And they're like, I'm a diehard for life.
Yeah.
You'll never pull me from them, And then what's crazy is how many times I have conversations with people and they're like, oh, I'm with whatever, or I don't really have a somebody. And I'm like, hey, I'm just curious. Like, what would it be like if you had somebody in your camp? What would it be like if somebody did care? What would it be like if you felt like you were an owner of that institution? And they're like, oh, that would be so cool. I'm like, really? Have you heard of a credit union?
Yeah.
Have you heard of a community bank? Right? Like,
Totally.
have you heard of a community ecosystem of financial services that really puts you at the core, that puts you at the heart of what they do and what they think about? And people resonate with those stories. And I think it's crazy how many times I hear of these stories. And then I think, man, I'm curious. I'm talking to this member in this Uber, and they're like telling me this crazy story that's like bringing me to tears about how PenAir serves them. And I'm sitting there going, I wonder if PenAir's telling that story. And that's what gets me so excited is when I talk to people like you and you're like, yeah, like we're looking for those stories. And we're not shy of telling those stories because it's not bragging. It's not egotistical. It's coming from a place of this is a demonstration of how we are a part of caring for our people and our community and our members. And we want you to have a story like that. We want to be a part of your story. And I think that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we get caught up on, again, table stakes, important. Gotta continue to make sure that those things are there and continue to improve, and we make things easy and remove friction and all of that stuff. Super important. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm discounting that because I'm not. Obviously, critically important. But this component that we're talking about now is the one that we probably don't pay enough attention to and put enough of an effort into, like the same kind of effort we put over here, which should, obviously shouldn't change, because then that really helps people understand who they're doing business with. Going back to your example with that company, right? You don't care that you lost your shorts. I mean, obviously that's kind of an extreme situation, but you would care if they were on the news for the opposite thing. They were stealing money from babies or something. I don't know, stealing candy from babies, right? So
yeah,
it's so important, and we as an industry need to do a better job of letting the secret out and helping people understand that while we might not be the only option, and heck, we might not be the only place they bank, because as I mentioned, I think I got like 16 apps on my phone for different financial services, right? And I remember reading somewhere that the average was somewhere like over 9 or something like that. Don't quote me on that, but the point is that people are using different services, and they're not just parking their money in one place. But the point is that if you really want to do business with people that care and with an organization that cares, then the credit union is there, and the credit union is going to be there for you as well. I have several personal examples, but I have one that comes to mind of that, and just in my own world, because that also shaped me, and how I think about things. And I start, as I alluded to at the start of the conversation, I started in member service, and I worked in branches while I was going to college, and I love that time because it really helped shape me. And I have a handful of members to this day. I don't even work at that credit union anymore, and to this day still call me for advice or wish me happy birthday or whatever. There's this one particular example that I always remember and that I always like to share because of the impact. And this was really early in my career, probably within my first 3 years at the credit union. And I remember helping this elderly man and his family. I helped them over the course of several years, but I started to help them when I was relatively new, 2 or 3 years into the credit union. And, they were a great family, and I took care of everything they needed. They just had questions. They needed whatever they needed, they would come to me. I became their de facto banker. And over time, this member started to get dementia, and I think he already had it, and just started to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And I continued to help him, all the way up until I moved, which was several, years later. I at that same credit union, I ended up moving to another city to take on an operation there. Well, needless to say, unfortunately, the member passed away, but his daughter made it a point to call me, to tell me. And, that's one of those moments where, like, okay, well, number one, I'm super sad because I spent a lot of time with this individual. I got to know him and his family, and I know what he meant to them. And I mean, he meant something to me too. You build relationships with people. Yeah. But the fact that she made it a point with everything going on to call me in a different city to tell me was huge. Well, that's not where it ended. His son, her brother, was stationed at the military base in the same city where I was living. And I guess, his sister told him that I was there, and he showed up to the credit union unannounced one day, and I get a phone call like, hey, such and such. And I'm like, but the last name was familiar. Yeah. So I was like, huh. So I come out and he wanted to come and meet me and just to thank me, for the care that I took for their father. And because at the end it was really hard. And they said that nobody else anywhere else could help him because, my grandfather had dementia too. You get to a point where you can be really aggressive or you just kind of repeat the same thing over and over, all of the symptoms that are just horrifying. And, it didn't faze me one bit because I knew who he was before he got sick, and it didn't matter. I was there to help them. And he made it a point to come and talk to me and meet me and shake my hand and just tell me how much that I meant to him and his family. And I'm like, even to this day, it just hits me like this is the impact that we make on people, whether it's, in a member service role like I was in at the time, or even just as a credit union. You step up and it could just be this employee that you don't remember, like the one that helped you get home, in a scenario where they're helping you solve, but they tell you, I got you. And they got your back and they help you through whatever that was. That's what credit unions are, is the point I'm making. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think if you think about it through that lens, you're kind of reminded it is an absolute incredible honor to be needed by someone.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think sometimes we take that for granted. And, kind of similarly, this is one of those, it was like a crazy, epic, simple life lesson that will just never leave me. And it was early in my career with Tyfone, and our COO was on a call, and he made a comment, and it was in context of something else. He wasn't trying to make a point or make a point to me, but it just always stuck out. And he made the comment. He said, if a customer calls you at 2 a.m, they don't give a crap about the weather. They're not calling you to ask about the weather. They're calling because they need you. And it's a really big honor to be needed by someone. So if somebody calls you at 2 a.m, you should be honored to pick up the phone because they called you. You were who they called in their moment of need. And that's an honor. And you should carry that with a badge of honor. And you should then treat it with the respect that it deserves, that someone needed you. And that's kind of always stuck with me. And it really reshaped, like, it's an honor to be needed. And then you look at what that turns into. And it's like, that father, he needed you for financial services, and he needed you to help him. And especially when he needed somebody that was the only person that could help them. And like, what a cool honor that turned into for you. And that's what I mean. Like, I feel so passionate about the credit union industry telling those stories, because just like going back to, the example of the company with the stock that I have, right? It's not even just about the experiences that I have with the brand that builds that bank. It's about the experiences that others have with that brand that are shared with me that have an impact on the bank of loyalty they've built with me, right? I may never need my credit union in a moment of need, but if I hear time and time again from my credit union how they helped other people in need, there's a part of me that's kind of like, well, yeah, I want to participate in that. I didn't need them, but like me being a part of that credit union helped that person. That's kind of cool, right? And I think that's where that whole, cooperation, cooperative community model comes from. It's from people who care about that. And I think there's a lot of us out there like that. And so I think there's a huge market opportunity for credit unions by just being who you are. As crazy as it sounds.
Got to be who we are, but we got to execute too. Because at the end of the day, if we're the nicest people on the planet, but we're not able to give members what they want, then it falls apart. It's that balance that we've been talking about.
So great point. So pull this all together for me, Derrick. So how do you take all of this and with the probably 10 million things you could do with your time in a day, how does this help create a priority list for you and your credit union? Like, how does this help you to sit down at the start of every day and say, okay, these are the things that I want to tackle. These are the strategic objectives for our credit union. These are the problems that we're going to solve. These are the opportunities we're going to take advantage of. These are the things that we're going to do for our members because I think it's going to have impact and add value. Like, how does that structure your day?
Well, the way that I don't know how it structures my day, but if we look at it a little bit more, from a macro perspective, right, and how it structures my thought process and how we prioritize and place levels of importance on things, it goes back to what I said earlier. It's understanding what our members need. It's understanding who they are, and it's being able to deliver based on those things. So we don't want to just go out and like the e-notary example that I used, a little while ago. We don't want to just go out and just dump a bunch of stuff out there and then make sure it works really well. A lot of the work has to start with truly understanding what these folks need and what our members need and what the communities need. And there's a multitude of things that we do around that, from a voice of the member perspective to understanding how members are navigating through our digital channels and when where there's abandonment and where there's issues. And, there's online and social media reputation and just number of things, right? And we leverage that and take that information and we use it to make decisions and we use it to help guide what we do. And really, as far as how I prioritize, my days, and if we're really getting more specific, it's really based on that one thing and based on what our members need and how we're going to do that and how I enable my teams to be able to execute on that and be successful from that perspective and ensure that we have alignment from that, North Star perspective. We're all moving in the right direction. So that's how I prioritize my thought process and how we prioritize as an organization and how I help my team prioritize the things that they do on a daily basis.
I like it. If I can give one piece of advice that kind of aligns with what you were talking about, one of the things that I love to, when I talk to our customers or our prospective customers and we look at trying to do a project, right? And whatever it is, if it's in, a new third-party integration or whatever, if it's a new, adjustment to how a workflow works or a new feature or function, I always ask, and it's so dorky, it comes across so dorky, but like I think it works. I just ask, what's your definition of success?
100%.
What is your definition of success? And is that definition objective, subjective, or both? But how do you measure? How do you look back at different time periods and say this met my criteria for success? And if you can't write that down, you shouldn't start the project.
And not just for a project, but that is such a critical question for team members as well, right? As we're talking about the leaders in the organization and the things that differentiate us, the great people, is you have to understand how they define success as well. And not only from the project perspective, but also with their own personal values and career and all of that stuff to help kind of tie all of that together. So yeah, super, super great point on that. Because if you don't know, half the time, right? Like if you really think about it, sometimes you see projects kick off and nobody knows what they're doing it for. There's just a project and let's go. But if you define the success and the roadmap and the vision around it, and if you can articulate it, if you can write it down, then people know what they're working towards.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think a lot of times it helps craft, like, is this actually the right decision? Because one of the things that you see a lot of times is, I don't know, just trying to think of a really simple example that doesn't like call out anybody or anything, you know, but like we say we want to implement X, and then we say, okay, well, what's the definition of implementing X? Well, the definition of success is that it does this for our members. And you're like, okay, well, if that's actually the definition of success, is doing this for our members, is that actually the right way to do that? Yes, it's a way to get there.
Yeah.
But if that's actually the definition of success, is there a different avenue that actually gets us closer to that definition of success?
Yeah. You know, I keep mentioning this example, and I'll use it again because it's a real world example. And we learn from our mistakes, right? We made a mistake and we learn from it. And I'm okay sharing that. You know, I mentioned the e-notary thing.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't in that conversation, but when it happened, that definition of success probably either wasn't, you know, that conversation either didn't happen or the definition of success is, well, now we start offering e-notary. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, how is that a success?
Yeah.
Who is that going to help? And, you know, how prevalent is this, the need? You know, later on, of course, we found out that there's only like a handful of things in the states that we operate in that can actually be e-notarized. So the demand isn't high because most things have to have, you know, wet notary, I guess, for lack of a better term. So that goes back to how important it is to really understanding, you know, not only your members' needs, but the needs of the area that you serve. And tying that, going back to the definition of success, because you can define it all day. Hey, we need to do this because it does this. Well, but is that really needed?
Yeah.
And is that really the real definition of success? Is we want to provide services to our member that drive value. Well, is this going to drive value to our members? Well, no, not really, because they really can't use it anyways. I mean, they can for a few number of things, you know, but to get the point across, it's not really helping many folks out, and going back to the opportunity cost of something else we could have done that could have been truly impactful.
Yeah, no, I love that example because I think that's a great, it does kind of do a good job of walking us through that, right? Like if you sit there and you say, okay, we're going to do this e-notary. You say, okay, what's our definition of success? Well, our definition of success is that now we can offer e-notary. You're like, no, that's not a definition of success. That's an outcome. What is the definition of success? Well, the definition of success for that is that members, I'm just going to make this up, members that are, you know, getting a mortgage need to have this document notarized, and we really want to help drive higher adoption in our mortgages. And so that is the definition of success, is making the process of getting a mortgage, you know, easier. And you say, okay, well, is that the biggest pain point in getting the mortgage then? Well, no, it's actually here, but that is one of the pain points that we could solve for. And then you look at it and you say, okay, well, how much is this e-notary digital service? Okay, well, it costs us $1,500 a month. Okay, well, how many members actually need e-notary for this and can get e-notary? Oh, it's 10? How much does it cost us to have an employee drive out there and just have them notarize it? It costs us $100 a member to do that? Okay, so it costs us $1,000 to send someone out there to go get a wet notary and build a relationship with them. It's $500 a month less. And now we've met the definition of success of just helping people through that process of getting the mortgage. And, oh, we checkmarked that box. And, oh, we didn't do this project. So now we can focus on something else in that mortgage lending flow that actually creates a bigger bottleneck. Right? Like, I'm just making all that.
No, but the thought process
it's
is
a different conversation.
Right. And you know, sometimes because we're not perfect, and as we keep alluding to, we're never going to be perfect. We make these mistakes. What a great learning moment, because we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. And we just have to make sure that the tuition was well earned, if you will.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important point to kind of add to it is that going back to what we said earlier, like, we're not perfect, right? And it's really, really easy for me to sit here and sound like I do a great job, better than anybody, at doing this whole define success. Dude, I screw that up all the time. Like, literally, I just had a conversation yesterday with somebody on my team, and we were like, when we did this, what was our definition of success? And both of us were like, I have no idea. But if we had asked that question, we probably would have taken a totally different path.
Because
you know what I mean?
In the moment.
We just get in the moment. You just
and we
go, and you're like,
yeah.
shiny object syndrome, right? Whatever it is. Like,
we're all guilty of it. Me
all
included.
guilty of it. Totally. Well, Derrick, I mean, dude, it's been an absolute blast chatting with you. And this is the kind of stuff that, dude, I get so fired up having these kinds of episodes, talking with people like you that really get it, like get the differentiation of credit unions. And you're thinking about how to very like strategically, tactically, but also very thoughtfully and emotionally and humanly go about bringing that differentiation to the market. I've said it a million times. I'm going to say it again. Like, I'm a father to young kids right now. One day they're not going to be little kids. Yeah. I want my kids to grow up, and I don't want them to say, I got to go to the bank. I want them to say, like, I have to go to my relationship center. Like, I got to go to my credit union, right? That's important to me. I want the world of community financial services to exist when I don't, because I see the good that it does. And when I get to talk to people like you, I'm like, yes, it's still going to be around. Like, we're still doing this thing right. So thank you so much, man, for spending time with me. And thank you for just, in my humble opinion, doing it right and just caring and putting the right thought process. Like you said, you're not perfect, but man, you're doing a pretty good job. So thank you.
Yeah, it was a blast. A lot of fun. Thank you for the opportunity to have the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. But hey, before I let you go, I got 2 final questions for you. So first off, where do you go to stay up to date on what's happening in the industry?
I mean, really, all of the usual suspects, right? Like your typical trades and e-magazines and all that kind of stuff. E-magazine, is that even a term? But you know what I mean, right? All of the stuff that everybody's heard of, like the CU Times and the Financial Brand, and all of that stuff. But where I really find value, and where I tend to feel like I get a better pulse for what's happening in the industry, is LinkedIn, honestly, because of the news and the updates that my connections are sharing, or the things that my connections are writing, right? Because a lot of us, that's the other cool thing about our industry, is a lot of people in the industry are writing or putting content out there or whatever. And that is, to me, the best place, the best aggregator to get great insight into what's happening to the industry. And that requires building a network, and certainly would like to help continue to build my network and learn from others. But I recommend that to everybody. I like to look at LinkedIn and news of my colleagues and peers and people in the industry and outside the industry, and sometimes I get through that I'll get exposed to something that I wouldn't have otherwise. Yeah. So for me, I find a lot of value in that.
Well, then this probably tells me I know how you're going to answer this next question. But so if people want to connect with you, or if they want to learn more about your credit union, how can they do that?
LinkedIn is absolutely the best place to start. Look me up on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect, love to learn from others, love to share. You can learn a lot about our credit union on LinkedIn as well. Our team does a fantastic job doing that. And you can go to, PenAir.org as well. But LinkedIn is probably the best spot because you'll get a little more than you get on the website.
That's awesome. I love that. I do actually love seeing the credit unions that are super active on LinkedIn, because I'm a hardcore consumer of content on LinkedIn too. Yeah. It does a great job of aggregating. Like, I actually appreciate that LinkedIn kind of started as the whole like find a job type of platform, but it's really morphed into just our professional like connections, circles, social media. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And it's like, I get to see pictures of Derrick and his kids traveling around, and I get to learn about a member success story at PenAir and a new product they launched. You know what I mean? All in the same thread. And I think that's super cool. So I'm a big fan of that answer. But again, Derrick, thank you so much for taking so much time out of your day. Thanks for kind of invigorating me and hopefully the folks that listened or watched this episode. And thanks for coming and being a guest on the Digital Banking Podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Banking Podcast, powered by Tyfone. Find more episodes on digitalbankingpodcast.com, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.